Hello, I'm Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this August 9th, Wednesday evening West Weather Update brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To start here, I wanted to mention the unfortunate wildfires that have really kind of broken the news here this morning. They started, it's seemingly yesterday afternoon Hawaii time. Terrible images coming out of Lahaina, Maui. That's really kind of on the western slopes of Maui here. Strong winds, probably influenced by Hurricane Dora. We'll talk about that in just a few slides here. But some of the satellite imagery, pretty clear as to what was going on here. We saw wildfires spark up, get on the leeward slopes of the mountains here of Hawaii. They pushed into the Lahaina community. Some other cities, unfortunately, affected. I won't show the videos or the images that have come out in the news. They're not hard to find. Unfortunately, just the town seemingly burning there in Lahaina, the historic district lost. I've actually been to that city once or twice now. Beautiful area. Seemingly much of it now burnt down. Just terrible to see. If we look at some of these other imagery here, this is more from overnight. See this hot spot here in infrared imagery on the western slope of kind of the big volcano here, and then the smaller mountains toward the west, where Lahaina is specifically. Showing up as a hot spot. Not what we want to see. This is a product we use typically for North American wildfires. We've seen the volcanic heat from this when there's some eruptions, but unfortunately this is a result of an urban wildfire kind of combination scenario. Not what we want to see. And even just looking at the smoke plume here, this kind of like dense, dark smoke plume coming off Maui, I can tell you that when you look at like 100-mile long, big, dark smoke plume like this, it looks more like a huge forest fire is burning, in Washington or Canada. There's not really big forests on the western kind of leeward slopes of the islands of Hawaii. There's not much rainfall that falls there on kind of an annual basis, I should say. There's more brush kind of fires. So to see a smoke plume this big is it's indicative that some bigger structures are burning, and unfortunately, what we're seeing here is the smoke plume. What I suspect is from the city of Lahaina, more specifically here. So, terrible situation unfolding there. It's been somewhat contained, if that word is appropriate, contained for now. Potentially still more wildfire risks here for the rest of the state going forward here today. We'll talk about that in just a bit. I mentioned earlier, Hurricane Dora likely playing a role in the wildfires there. This is a very powerful storm. Been Category 4 or major hurricane now for quite some time. It has persisted for 3,000 miles plus from the eastern Pacific kind of portion, or the third of the Pacific we watch for. We were talking about it last week, certainly. Moved into the central Pacific just to the south of Hawaii. Now trying to get into the western Pacific eventually at the end of this week. So it's just been a very impressive storm just on a longevity basis, but also how strong it's been. A major hurricane for a very long time. You can see it here spinning up closely. It's kind of has this perfect shape to it. What I mean by that is we actually call these hurricanes annular hurricanes because they have this almost complete kind of circle or wheel here. Very little spiral banding just kind of showing up at the end of this video here. But we do see these in the Central Pacific at times. They're very powerful storms typically when they reach that kind of annular mode, if you will. And this one, unfortunately, now having distant impacts to the weather in Hawaii, which is pretty unfortunate. Not really anywhere close to landfall if we look at it more specifically here in the Central Pacific. I'll make this valid as of yesterday afternoon when things really got pretty hairy in Hawaii. If you look closely here, this is Hurricane Dora, hundreds of miles to the south of Hawaii. But unfortunately, a hurricane is a really deep low pressure system. We track how deep they get at that center low as kind of a proxy for how strong they are. We also have this big high pressure system up here to the north of the island. And if you think you have a big high pressure system not terribly far away, a very deep low pressure system in the form of that hurricane, well, in between the two, you have to somewhere have a big pressure gradient force, kind of gradient. And unfortunately, that was right over Hawaii in this situation. You can see the strong winds here, analyzed here from the GFS forecast here. These blew up and over the windward slopes where we get those tropical rainforests. Some of the rainiest areas in the world are on those windward slopes of the Hawaiian mountains here. The big island here on the northeast side where these trade winds come around, same kind of wind orientation with Hurricane Dora to the south, blowing from east to west. That's why we see these big rainfall values, just crazy amounts on an annual basis here on the northeast side of the islands of Hawaii on that windward slope side. But on the backside, those winds rise up and they actually they lose a lot of that moisture in the form of rainfall. But on the backside, that air is now drier, having lost this rainfall. And the same parcel of air that's much drier is now forced to extend down the backside of the mountain. You can think of it being kind of pushed down the mountain. and it condenses that air even further. And because it's drier, it has a higher propensity to heat up. So now we have fast-moving descending air coming down the mountain. It's hotter, it's drier than it was. And unfortunately, that's a recipe for wildfire generation and influence. The same kind of phenomenon we see in the Santa Ana winds in southwest California. So it's not just a Hawaii phenomenon. We see it even over here in the western U.S. And really this kind of whole diagram, this kind of idea of orographic lifting where we have the mountains, which produce a lot of the rainfall, kind of ring the air of moisture either in the form of rain or snow if it's cold enough at the top of the mountain. But then this dry backside, this very hot temperatures coming down the backside of these slopes, we see all across the western U.S. It influences so much of our weather, and unfortunately we're seeing kind of a microcosm of it here in Hawaii. Looking more specifically, just look at a true color imagery of the kind of Hawaii from space. This is not from yesterday, just kind of a random picture here. But you can see those tropical rainforests, the flora on the northeast side of each mountain. But on this backside, this leeward side here, which includes the Lahaina area in Maui, dry conditions more typically. You actually have almost desert-like conditions here on some of these leeward slopes. That's why it was a brush fire and not a forest fire. But nonetheless, kind of a sad situation unfolding from this entire kind of hurricane situation. You think about the climate of Hawaii, and then on top of this, the western slopes of Maui here dealing with a moderate drought here this summer. That kind of set the stage for all of it. If you jump over to California and take a look at just kind of a random satellite imagery here, same phenomenon on a bigger scale. So you have the coastal mountain ranges, which wring out some moisture here as rainfall. The Central Valley sits in a little bit of a rain shadow as a result of that. And then whatever moisture is left in that air mass has to kind of contend with the very upper reaches of the Sierra Nevada. That gets all that moisture out in the form of snow as it goes over the crest. But on the backside, it's forced to descend. It's much, much drier at this point, so it can get quite a bit hotter. And that's why Death Valley, way over here on the eastern slopes, is the hottest place in the world at times, because that air is descending, getting drier, condensing as that warm air mass comes down the backside of the mountains here. Jumping over, looking at this is the current satellite picture here in the Central Pacific. There's Hurricane Dora continuing its kind of incredible track through the Pacific. Started, somewhere way over here in the Pacific. It has marched toward the southwest, toward the west-southwest, maybe more specifically, and heading now off into the western Pacific, where once it passes the date line, will be named a typhoon rather than a hurricane as it gets into what we call the western Pacific. So an incredible journey from Dora, and then unfortunately impacting the weather in Hawaii, hundreds of miles away from it. If you look closer at the National Weather Service advisories for Hawaii, just here this afternoon, it's really their morning here in Hawaii as the sun comes up. Red flag warnings for the state continuing, so still seeing those strong trade winds coming down the backside of the mountains, not as strong as they were yesterday. That risk for wildfire continuing today, unfortunately. And then the news doesn't get much better. If we look at the Eastern Pacific here, watching a number of potential areas of interest here in the Eastern Pacific. If you remember, about maybe a week or two ago, I mentioned that the second week of August, we'd potentially see kind of an uptick in tropical activity. We were looking at the MJO and how it kind of sneak over into this area. I think we're seeing that now with this kind of heightened activity. The National Hurricane Center here highlighting 3 separate areas for further development over the next 7 days. Nothing too high of probability here. This orange one, 40 to 60% over the next 7 days. So nothing a huge risk right now, but enough certainly to catch our attention. So if we look a little bit closer at the forecast here, some of these trying to sneak back over toward Hawaii. Now, I don't want to raise any kind of panic or alarm there. It's still quite a ways out from where these storms might show us their track. But nonetheless, something worth keeping an eye on. First of which, over here in the Eastern Pacific, doesn't look very organized at first glance here, just kind of weak showers and thunderstorms. No kind of obvious counterclockwise spin if you look closely there. But this one here in the middle, a much broader kind of maybe disorganized yet thunderstorm complex, but it does have a little bit, if you see there at the end, a little bit of a clockwise spin. I think that's why this one is kind of warranting that 40 to 60% chance of development from the National Hurricane Center. If we take a little bit closer look at some of the forecasts here, we'll jump this over. Let's look at the Eastern Pacific and how some of these might develop. So this forecast now valid as a Wednesday evening. There's that big kind of broad rotation there we saw on that second system. Very weak kind of reflection there in the low-level vorticity. As I take this forecast into Saturday and Sunday now, we can see that first system trying to develop, still pretty weak here, and that second system, again, still weak here this weekend, but trying to tighten up and get a little bit more organized, potentially making a run at a tropical storm as we get into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Now, both of these, again, kind of concerningly heading off toward the west. You can think of Hawaii's way out here, closer to 20 degrees north. But we just saw, unfortunately, from Dora, they don't even have to be very close to impact the weather. If I jump over to the central Pacific region, we'll kind of see, we'll pick these up as they get further west. There's Dora exiting the region. Get into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There's that first system now trying to form into a tropical storm here. As we get into Monday, August 14th, taking a southerly track similar to Dora, albeit quite a bit weaker here, at least on this forecast, than Hurricane Dora was. If it's this week in the forecast, all the way out next Tuesday, could see some increased winds here across Hawaii, but they probably won't be as strong as we saw with Dora. Forecast now for hurricanes, we're talking 5, 6, 7 days out. Can't put too much weight in them, not a ton of accuracy when we get out that far, but certainly enough to kind of warrant some concern here. And then potentially that next system, a little bit stronger, this one more organized. This looks more of like a more bona fide hurricane here on this vorticity plot. Maybe making a turn toward Hawaii, but before I can go any further, we're all the way 10 days out now in the forecast. Just hard to say anything of confidence. The only thing worth saying is that there is some heightened risk over the next work week that we'll be tracking some storms trying to push into the central Pacific. Any specific impacts to Hawaii in that forecast, we'll have to wait till we get more information. One storm I did want to touch on is Tropical Storm Eugene. This is one that kind of faded away in a weekend in the far eastern Pacific. But we still see this little kind of ghostly reflection of it. In fact, it might be hard to see, but there's still this kind of little swirl here. As you watch those colors fade away, this little swirl here in the eastern Pacific. This picked up a lot of water vapor and moisture that's now sitting kind of over the ocean here. It's water vapor is actually invisible until it forms kind of droplets and clouds. So it's hard to see, but there's this big plume of water vapor here. If I jump this over and take a look at the total precipitable water forecast here from the GFS, let's make this valid as a Wednesday evening. You can see this plume of increased precipitable water kind of as a proxy for the water vapor here. That's really extending through Southern California into Nevada, all the way up into Arizona, and then kind of the peak of it here all the way down off the coastline. But over the next evening here and through Wednesday evening and into Thursday, that'll be swinging up into Southern California, parts of Arizona and Nevada. So keeping an eye on that for potentially some thunderstorm or shower activity coming along the southwestern coastline of California, and then probably enhancing some of that upland monsoonal activity in parts of the higher elevations in Nevada, parts of southern Utah and Arizona. Can't rule out something kind of getting into the Gila River Basin as well, just a little bit east along the river here in south central Arizona. If we look over the next 72 days, this is just looking at the ECMWF forecast for rainfall. Let's take this out, the 72 hours, I said 72 days, didn't I? The next 3 days ending here on Saturday afternoon. See that upland monsoon activity perhaps even pushing into the Sierra Nevadas, and then some of those coastal showers and storms tonight and into tomorrow, Thursday. I think there will be the most activity there in that Los Angeles and Oxnard area. Now the values on this map here, they're in inches, not seeing huge forecast values here from the ECMWF, but this model is not going to capture any kind of individual thunderstorm that blows up, and some of those can drop a half inch of rain very quickly on some of these kind of coastal mountains, and that can be enough at times to cause some weak mudslides or perhaps some coastal flooding. So a little bit of a concern here for thunderstorms, not expecting anything too catastrophic in that regard, but it is kind of a pickup in activity here over the next 48 hours. Beyond that, finally, I think this is the first advisory map I've shown for the western region that does not include an excessive heat warning. Now, Texas will call that out of the region for now. This is a red flag warning in Colorado. So finally, nothing in the form of excessive heat valid here as of Wednesday afternoon. I think that's good news. Finally get a break in the heat here, especially for areas down here in southwestern Arizona and Southern California. Take a closer look at the radar imagery. This is showing Southern California, Southern Nevada, parts of Arizona. Remember that moisture plume I drew earlier, kind of extending through the southern part of California into Arizona? Well, those storms are really kind of following right along that. So storms in eastern Arizona, more specifically, these are very weak showers trying to move into southern Nevada. I think some weak shower activity just now beginning in Southern California as that kind of the peak of that moisture plume pushes in over the night tonight with higher chances for those storms or showers tomorrow through the day here for Southern California. Some of these might not be falling yet as rain. It can be dry at times in Southern California. Probably don't need me to tell you that. So some of these storms evaporate before that rain reaches the surface. But as those higher values of moisture push in, we do expect some of that rain to get into the area here on Thursday. Take a quick look at what this looks like from the simulated precipitation here, again from the ECMWF model. Take this through Thursday. You can see some of that increased rainfall activity we just talked about, Los Angeles, Oxnard area. Some of that upland monsoon activity you might have seen there in southern Nevada, parts of northern Arizona. On Friday afternoon, seeing things weaken just a bit here in terms of that activity as that kind of moisture plume pushes off into the interior west. Again, weaker here on Saturday, more of these kind of upland Colorado Plateau storms here. Nothing really seeing getting into the lower Colorado River Valley. The activity now moving out of Southern California. And then Sunday, Monday, not seeing much in the way of precipitation, except perhaps some showers and storms along the crest of the Sierra Nevadas. Can't rule out some showers and storms here in western Nevada getting into Monday and Tuesday of next week. Precipitation, not a huge story here over the next 7 days beyond what we just kind of talked about here, and maybe the Gila River Basin or Southern California. That kind of shifts our attention toward temperatures. If we look at daytime highs valid as of today, Wednesday afternoon, not a surprise not to see any kind of extreme temperatures on this map we just talked about. Finally getting a break from those excessive heat warnings. So only triple digits here in the desert southwest, not the triple digit teens that we saw in July. Talking low to mid 90s in the Central Valley of California, low to mid 80s in the Willamette Valley. Some nice relief there. So take this forecast through Thursday and Friday, still seeing temperatures more on the average seasonal side of things. As I get into Saturday and Sunday, bit of a spike in temperatures. Now we're talking mid-90s in the Willamette Valley, mid to high 90s in eastern Washington, mid-90s in parts of the Snake River Valley, and starting to push toward triple digits now in the Central Valley. So take this into Monday, temperatures increase, and then further into Tuesday, still seeing those high temperatures across the Pacific Northwest. Now triple digits for sure in the Central Valley here, Tuesday, August 15th, in triple digit teens across the Southwest. So unfortunately, heat coming back into the area, really kind of starting to pick up this weekend, more so Sunday, Monday, getting into Tuesday. Could see some heat advisories posted as a result of that. Not a surprise if I'm showing you heat in the forecast that we're probably going to be losing some of the troughiness we were talking about here more recently this week and getting into something that looks more like a ridge here getting out into next week. So I'll just show you what that looks like quickly. Here's the jet stream valid as of Wednesday evening and afternoon. More of a trough here over the Pacific Northwest, even another weak subtropical trough here over parts of California. That's kind of keeping temperatures down across the board, across the western U.S. As I take this into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday now, we have replaced that troughiness here in the Pacific Northwest with this big ridge coming in the polar branch of the jet stream now, pushing into parts of British Columbia and northwest Canada. That's going to open up this corridor here for higher temperatures. We do see a weak trough here over parts of the desert southwest, probably enough to keep that monsoon weak through this next weekend here, apart from those kind of upland showers we just talked about. But this kind of trough here, not particularly strong. I don't think strong enough to keep temperatures very cool in parts of California and Arizona. So as we get into Sunday and Monday, that trough really kind of fading out of the area, and we still see kind of some general weak ridging here over the Pacific Northwest. So expecting heat to build into the area Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of next week. And kind of given that we see this a little bit of a high over low pattern here, you see how we kind of have almost an S in the jet stream, if you will. We call this a Rex block as meteorologists. And we call it a block because it tends to block up the atmosphere for a bit. So it wouldn't be a surprise to me if we even saw out into the end of next week, the next work week, we still kind of see a similar pattern of a high over low with warmer temperatures across the Pacific Northwest more specifically, and then kind of general warmth across the western U.S., given that this Pacific jet stream is extending well into Canada at this point. And I'll jump us over. Let's look at the GFS ensemble here, just giving a kind of a different opinion and then an ensemble model here that takes us a little bit further out in the forecast. So this is valid as of Tuesday, August 15th, getting into Wednesday, August 16th, really kind of the end of the work week now. Maybe take this to Friday, August 18th. We still see kind of ridging just off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, likely, if this forecast is to be believed, keeping temperatures up here along the coastline. But we also see, maybe more importantly for folks in the Southwest, some of that heat dome that's been kind of sloshing back and forth from Texas to the Four Corners to Arizona back to Texas, that trying to push back into the area, which might bring temperatures back up across Arizona as we get into the end of next week. Too early to say anything specifically. If we do get kind of that general ridging back into the area and weaken that subtropical jet stream, could turn the monsoon back on in a more significant way toward the end of next week. Just some kind of light things we're watching with in that 7 to 10 day forecast. As far as the Climate Prediction Center is concerned, I'll jump over here and look at their 6 to 10 day outlook. This is really looking at the beginning of the work week next week. We see this highlighted area of above average temperatures in the Pacific Northwest, so the Willamette Valley, western Washington, northern California, perhaps even the northern reaches of the Central Valley. Above average chances for above normal temperatures here in this area, so keeping an eye here for high 90s, potentially triple digits here in the north Central Valley. If we look further toward the southeast, we see that kind of heat dome that we've been seeing all year centered over Texas. We saw those excessive heat warnings kind of at the beginning of this video. I mentioned as we get into the end of the work week next week, we could see this trying to push back over toward Arizona. If we look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, we still kind of see that heat dome here trying to push into Arizona. Still see those warm Pacific Northwest temperatures here as we get into really the third week of August now, August 16th through the 22nd in this forecast here. Looking closely at precipitation, if we do build some of this dome back into the area that we've been talking about, kind of this upper level ridging kind of broad across the west, that will try to restart that monsoon. So we are seeing some above average precipitation values here for mid-August here from the Climate Prediction Center. Nothing too extreme. Can't talk too much specifics in the forecast when we're talking about an 8 to 14 day forecast, but it is a trend we're keeping an eye on. And then one long-range outlook that did come out before I last spoke to you last Wednesday. We got the new seasonal forecast from the ECMWF that came out at the beginning of the month. The first one I'll show you is the September, October to November precipitation anomaly forecast. Really, let's call this the fall precip forecast. And we're seeing that kind of dry signal here in the Pacific Northwest continue, unfortunately. This is an area we've been watching for droughts, really kind of built in here over the last few weeks, maybe the last month or two. And unfortunately, seeing a continuation of that here, at least if this long-range forecast is to be believed. Anytime we're forecasting things out 1, 2, 3 months, confidence is going to decrease. But if it aligns with other connections we're seeing, it aligns with that kind of El Nino drought development we sometimes see in the Pacific Northwest. It aligns with persistence. So we've seen that drought development. Drought is persistent, so it kind of makes sense to me we might see it develop further in the future. And unfortunately, if I take this forecast from September, October, November into October, November, and December, you'll only see that signal increase here in the forecast, even into November, December, January now, with this big dry bullseye across parts of the Pacific Northwest. So this is kind of becoming an increasing concern for drought through the next water year in the Pacific Northwest. Can't say anything too confidently, 5 to 7 months out now, but enough that it definitely has my attention. And then just for kind of fun, taking this into December, January, and February, we see potentially the impacts of that subtropical jet building up with the El Nino we're expecting this winter, trying to bring more precipitation into coastal California, perhaps the lower Colorado River Valley. We'll keep an eye on that forecast as we go through the next month or two here. Did want to jump over, look at that same forecast for December, January, February. That's getting into Hawaii's wet season, kind of in spring 24. Again, hard to say anything too confidently that far out, but we do know that after these kind of El Nino falls and winters, Hawaii tends to have drought risks increase there for that next wet season. And we're seeing an agreement there from the ECMWF seasonal model that just was updated here, showing this kind of dry patch here over the state of California, or the state of Hawaii, I should say. So not the best news, I think, for that state and the islands of Hawaii. But nonetheless, I want to give you the forecast where it stands now. We jump back to the Climate Prediction Center, look at seasonal drought outlook. This is their prediction going forward for those drought conditions. This yellow color here is where they're expecting further drought development, and that brown color is where they're expecting drought to persist. So agreement there that drought is becoming of increasing concern here for the Willamette Valley, parts of the Pacific Northwest, perhaps parts of the lower Snake River Valley here, and parts of western Idaho, eastern Washington. Right now, Idaho kind of remaining out of this right now proper. What I mean by that, maybe the middle or upper Snake River Valley basin, but just kind of the proximity to this area here. Maybe some areas in here we'll have to watch for further drought development this winter. Too early to say anything specifically there. And then further drought development likely in parts of these monsoonal Four Corners area that have unfortunately had that delayed or weakened monsoon this year as a result of El Nino. Jumping down a little bit here, Hawaii, unfortunately, and totally painted now with that yellow color, which is drought development likely further, and that aligns with that kind of long-range forecast I just showed you there. Unfortunately, western Maui, where those wildfires are already in a moderate drought now, that's probably liable to increase unless we see big rainfalls come in for one of these tropical storms again. But that would likely come with more inclement risks for wind and mudslides and things like that. So not even sure if that's something we want to root for. That's all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for watching.